Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, can I analyze the 1982 case of the 3 fatalities on the set of Twilight Zone, the movie? Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I will put the link to Patreon in the description for this video. So first I'll look at the background of this case. I'll move to the timeline of the incident, then offer my analysis. In 1982, the motion picture Twilight Zone, the movie, was being filmed in California. The movie comprised 4 different stories. The first story was about a character named Bill Connor, who was played by the actor Vic Morrow. Bill goes back in time to the Vietnam War to protect children from American soldiers. The 2 children were played by 7-year-old Micah Din Lay and 6-year-old Renee Shin-Lee Chen. The filmmaker, John Landis, directed 2 of the stories, including the one about the Vietnam War. Now moving to the timeline of the incident. At 2:30 a.m. on July 23, 1982, the last scene of the Vietnam story was being filmed at a ranch called Indian Dunes in Santa Clarita, California. The ranch had been featured in a number of movies and TV shows, often for scenes set outside the United States. For example, if a film needed to have a jungle. So there was a lot of diverse scenery available at that location. The crew had been shooting at night for about 3 weeks. Many were tired and looking forward to getting the last scene over with. The scene involved Vic Morrow carrying the 2 children out of a village and across a shallow river. American soldiers in a low-flying helicopter were pursuing them. As this was going on, the village was going to be destroyed through a series of explosions. Vic Morrow was excited about the scene. He had not been getting a lot of work lately. This role was a major boost to his career, at least he thought it would be. Morrow did have some concerns about the scene, however. He had a premonition years before that he would be killed in a helicopter crash. The helicopter used in this scene was a Bell UH-1 Iroquois, piloted by a Vietnam veteran named Dorsey Wingo. As the actors were in the river, Wingo was hovering 25 feet from the ground. He turned the helicopter to the left for the next camera shot. A pyrotechnic effect was detonated from a mortar right below the tail rotor of the helicopter. This blew the tail rotor off of the helicopter, and the helicopter started spinning out of control. Right at this moment, Vic Morrow dropped Chen into the water. He was reaching out to grab her when the helicopter crashed. All 3 actors were killed. Chen was crushed by the right landing skid. Vic Morrow and Lay were decapitated by the main rotor blades of the helicopter. The crew wasn't sure what happened at first. John Landis and his second assistant director, Anderson House, ran over to the scene. House picked up Vic Morrow's torso, not realizing it was a human body. He thought it was a dummy that had fallen out of the helicopter. When he saw Vic Morrow's head on the shore, he realized what happened and screamed. 5 people involved in the production were charged with involuntary manslaughter: Landis, Folsey, Wingo, as well as a production manager, Dan Allingham, and an explosives specialist, Paul Stewart. It was the first time a director was charged in connection with a movie set fatality. The trial began in 1986 and lasted for over 9 months. The judge dismissed the involuntary manslaughter charges against Folsey and Allingham, but they were still facing criminal negligence. The 5 defendants blamed everybody but themselves, which, as it turns out, was a successful strategy. All 5 men were acquitted on May 29, 1987. The jury came away with 2 feelings. 1, an unnamed special effects technician who reported to Paul Stewart was responsible because he set off the pyrotechnics without first checking to see where the helicopter was. 2, they believed John Landis was also responsible, but the prosecution failed to prove that anyone could have foreseen the fatal crash. Millions of dollars were paid out after civil litigation. So nothing happened with the criminal. They were acquitted, but there was a substantial amount of money changing hands as far as the civil lawsuits. Now moving to my analysis. Many interesting items were revealed during the investigation and the trial. I'll go through several of them here. Item number 1. The scene was being shot in the early morning hours. child actors were not allowed to work at night unless they had a special waiver from the labor board. John Landis realized that because the roles of the two children did not involve speaking, they could technically be considered extras, and therefore he could sidestep the normal hiring process. Landis did not attempt to get a waiver. Rather, he directed the associate producer, George Folsey, to find a couple of children to fill the roles. After Folsey found them, he paid them under the table. Even though the parents of the children agreed to allow them to be in the movie, and they were aware that the children were being paid illegally, they were not aware that the children would be close to explosives and a helicopter. Folsey directed the parents to hide their children from a fire safety officer and not to tell firefighters on the set that the children were part of the scene. Item number 2, the pilot, Wingo, had concerns about the scene prior to it being shot. He believed the helicopter would be too close to the pyrotechnics. Right before the crash, the production manager felt as though the situation was getting dangerous and told Wingo, "Let's get out of here." John Landis shouted over the radio for the helicopter to get lower. Wingo eventually did try to fly away, but it was too late. A camera operator on board the helicopter said that Landis had ignored warnings about the dangers of using the explosives near the helicopter. Landis said, "We may lose the helicopter." It's not clear if he was joking or not. Item number 3. The prosecution made a key mistake prior to the trial. They did not indict Landis, Folsey, or Allingham for illegally hiring the two children. It would have been fairly easy to convict them of those charges. There was really no question they were responsible for that action. Item number 4. It's been suggested that Landis was too young, too immature, and too cavalier about safety to be a director of a film that involved dangerous stunts. In one scene prior to the fatal crash, Landis insisted that real bullets be used. This is apparently what caused the friendship between John Landis and Steven Spielberg to end, this activity of using live ammunition. Now, no one was hurt because of that, because they were shooting at foliage, but it was just the idea that he was doing something that was completely unnecessary. At one point, when they were running the test for a scene, an explosion rocked the helicopter. When concern was expressed about how dangerous that was, Landis reported, "You think that was big? You ain't seen nothing yet." The grand jury found Landis to be arrogant and impatient. He thought that being indicted was a big hassle. He had important things to do. He was a filmmaker, after all. Landis was just as arrogant and argumentative in front of the jury. He admitted to hiring the children because he thought the labor board would not allow them to work at night. After he was acquitted, Landis remained arrogant, defiant, and seemingly unaware of how he was being perceived. For example, he invited the members of the jury to a special screening of Coming to America, a 1988 film that he directed. It was a very successful movie. I think the general impression that John Landis gave off was that he was sorry that 3 people were killed on his movie set, but he really didn't know what it had to do with him. Almost like he was just another person observing from the outside, shaking his head in disbelief. How could this happen? When in fact he was in charge. It shows a lack of insight and a lack of compassion. John Landis was simply too important to get involved with all the details of being accused of manslaughter. It's just a lot of work because you have to go to trial, you have to sit there for a long time, you have to help the defense. So he was just aggravated with that whole situation. Moving to the next question. Were these defendants guilty? In my opinion, 3 of them were guilty of illegally hiring the children. That seems fairly clear. But as far as the involuntary manslaughter, it becomes a bit murky. This case is straightforward in one sense. 3 people died unnecessarily, but quite complex in the area of assigning blame for those deaths. Clearly nobody intended to cause death, and the responsibility may be spread over many people. These people did not seem like conspirators, so it's not like a situation where 5 people rob a store and only one has a gun and shoots somebody, but they're all guilty because it's a conspiracy. These people were functioning more independently and not involved in a criminal scheme. It may have taken mistakes by several of them, if not all of them, to cause the deaths. Dividing up culpability in this way is difficult. Can a person be 20% responsible for involuntary manslaughter? I suppose one could believe that just one person was responsible, like John Landis was responsible because he was in charge. But again, he appeared to be only part of a larger problem. In my opinion, this was a preventable incident that was caused by a number of failures, but there was still reasonable doubt. Now, reasonable doubt is the legal standard, but what about the guilt in reality? Were they actually guilty? Here are my thoughts on actual guilt. Whenever unintentional fatalities occur in these types of industrial settings, it is often a series of failures that leads to the problem. Not necessarily one big mistake, but a number of small mistakes. The two children were brought onto the set illegally, and their parents were not given the full story about the level of danger. So two forms of protection were removed from the children. The government, in the form of not going to the labor board, and the parents, in the form of not being honest with them. The three men responsible for bringing the children onto the set knew they were breaking the law, and in my opinion are therefore responsible for what happened to the children. So as far as actual guilt, again, just my opinion, those three men were responsible for the deaths of the two children, but not of Vic Moreau's death. Vic Moreau knew something was wrong, he knew the scene was dangerous, and he took his chances. He certainly didn't deserve to die, but I don't know if his death involved a criminal action. Vic Moreau had the opportunity to make an informed decision. The children did not. What lessons can we learn in this case? I have 4 here. 1. As far as the arrogant and condescending behavior of John Landis, some may defend him by saying if he had acted remorseful, that would make him look guilty. There's a difference between admitting fault and showing compassion. One person can be sorry that something happened without confessing to a crime. Interestingly, there were times that John Landis did appear to show that he was sad. For example, he attended all 3 funerals. I think it was his behavior in court that really aggravated people. After the acquittal, John Landis would continue to wreak havoc in the form of making movies like Beverly Hills Cop 3, Blues Brothers 2000, Innocent Blood, and Oscar. These movies would not lead to any fatalities. They would just make the audience wish they were dead. Lesson number 2, the 3 defendants involved in hiring children illegally put themselves in a terrible position. They were lucky to escape without a conviction. A good way to avoid being a defendant is not to commit any offenses, not even what might be considered minor crimes. If somebody is willing to commit a small crime, a jury may look at that and think, well, perhaps they're willing to commit a more serious crime. Lesson number 3, the tragic Twilight Zone movie deaths led to a number of changes in safety regulations for movie production. Just like in the airline industry, something is learned from every catastrophe. The industry becomes a little bit safer by learning from its mistakes. These precautions that came from the Twilight Zone incident almost certainly have saved lives. Lesson number 4, the trial that resulted from this incident did not result in a conviction, but it did strike fear into the hearts of directors and producers. Hollywood produces a lot of terrible movies. We see bad acting, badly written scripts with nonsensical and preachy plot lines, and substandard special effects. They can continue to do all those things, but they cannot compromise on safety. That is the one and only area where they must demonstrate competence. Those are my thoughts on the Twilight Zone, the movie disaster of 1982. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comments section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be informative. Thanks for watching.